Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Jane Raleigh. I'm the Director of Dance Programming at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. Very pleased to be with you here today, and pleased to be joined by Jennifer Archibald, choreographer, Christine Cox, the Artistic Executive Director of BalletX, Emily Morgan, the costume designer for the work, and Guy de Lancey, scenic and projection designer for MASLOW'S Peak. So I want to start off maybe with you, Christine. I want to talk a little bit about BalletX. One of the things that I feel makes this company special in the field is that you are constantly commissioning, always bringing new voices and new ballets into the world. Can you just start by, has that been the case always for the company, and why is that such a core part of your mission at BalletX?
Thank you, Jane. The company is 19 years old. Next season will be our 20th anniversary. And the original idea was selfish. It was my colleague Matthew Neenan and I wanted to just play in the summers when we were off from the Pennsylvania Ballet. And we were adventurous and wanted to just kind of push the envelope a bit. And then as the company formed and this passion for ballet was always there, but the X was the unknown, and that really, that X just started to get bigger and bigger in my mind, and I realized that pushing ballet forward, creating places for artists to bring their ideas, make new work, but move ballet forward with the art form, but with their creativity on top of it. So we started with ballet, and then the X was, everything new. And so we've commissioned over 140 world premieres by 80 different choreographers. So we really want to just keep experimenting, because there is where the life and the opportunities for creativity to really blossom.
Awesome. So turning our attention to MASLOW'S Peak, Christine, one more question for you. This isn't the first time that you have worked with Jennifer. I think your first collaboration was in 2022 with Exalt, a more abstract ballet. I'm curious, as you thought about expanding into a full-length ballet and creating something so big, why did you feel Jennifer was the right choreographer for that moment?
Jennifer and I met in Philadelphia. She came down to Philadelphia, and we spent a lot of time together and just really bonded and built a strong friendship. And when we created Exalt, it was just go play. And I was so blown away by her articulation, her command of classical ballet, how she integrated her experience with house dance and movement. Even though I also was a ballet dancer, I loved going out clubbing, so it was like we were soul sisters. I just connected with her movement. It moved me in my seat, and I thought, this is the next choreographer who should take on a full evening program for the company and tell an untold story. I really think it's interesting to create evenings of one choreographer's voice telling new stories.
And maybe the other half of that question to you, Jennifer. I have enjoyed watching your career all over the country, working with many different ballet dancers, ballet companies, more contemporary, more classical. Why did you feel like BalletX was a company where you could dig into this work now? What is it about these artists that you felt like could carry this work?
I think it's the versatility of the dancers. I had my eyes on BalletX when I was at the Ailey School, and I was just watching their ability to attack the ballet line and then also play with different aesthetics movement-wise. So it was, when you feel that you're looking at these dancers that could potentially embody the movement that you envision as a creator, you know that would be the right place for you to choreograph at. And I've been asked to do full lengths from other companies, and you have these stories in your back pocket, and you're just trying to figure out what story fits best for that specific company. And the images and the themes and the physicality that I would require to do a piece that's inspired by Lord of the Flies is definitely difficult to do, and that level of difficulty and that level of grit and ferociousness was something that I thought the BalletX dancers would be able to handle.
Yeah, Yeah, that's what makes me excited about it. Let's build off of that. Why this story now? And I know you mentioned it's inspired by Lord of the Flies as a narrative, but I know you're pulling from other themes and stories in the world. What makes you want to spend time inside of those themes and narratives today?
I mean, the themes of the tension between civilization and savagery, the tension of power and authority, isolation, division, are all things that I think we as a community are dealing with day to day. And it's important for me to create a movement that I am connected with emotionally and where a dance audience can see themselves within the movement.
Where are you in your process right now? And maybe this question opens it up to everyone. Maybe you could speak a little bit about the first premiere of the work that happened, I think, a year ago now, but then I know the last week you've all been together in a pretty unique space working on the work. Would just love for you to share with everyone about that.
Well, the first draft of my ideas came to fruition for the preview, which happened in March 2024. And it was interesting because I was trying to figure out, sometimes when you have a conversation about story ballets, many of the questions that are asked is how literal you're going to be and when you start to bring that abstract theme work into it. So playing with those ideas for the preview was my first set. And then I went to Jacob's Pillow and created 10 more minutes of movement. And then just working with other dancers throughout New York City, I was developing different solo work and just constantly attacking thematically how I was going to create the story. I am in my third week of rehearsals right now. I came into rehearsals at the beginning of March doing 2 weeks of setting movement, and it's all about layering for the full length. So this third week, we were able to go into Proof Productions, who are the fabricators of the show, and we're trying to work on projection to go in sync with the movement that I created for the first 2 weeks. And Guy de Lancey has been by my side, trying to develop that aspect of the story.
Do you want to add anything, Guy, at this stage?
I guess. I've worked with Jennifer a couple of times, and what I've learned working with Jennifer is that she doesn't create work in a social vacuum. She puts it within a social context within our time, and that context tends to have a texture and an atmosphere. So I approach the design from that point of view, from looking for an atmosphere. And plenty has been written about how scenic design now is not just about placing scenic objects on stage and then pasting performers into the scenic element. It's about a mutual trajectory of dramaturgy that you work with the director, choreographer, the dancers, the bodies on stage, and you develop it along that trajectory. So it's all about atmosphere. Atmosphere and feeling. So Jennifer she comes to me and she drops a pebble in the pond and it ripples, and then you sort of respond to it. But our first idea, Jennifer said, you know the structure at the World Trade Center, that sort of whale-shaped bone-looking thing, which is how we started developing it. And then once you start looking at the parameters of cost, possibly touring the production, you reshape it, but constantly keeping your eye on what the story is, what the social context is, and what the bodies are doing on stage.
Thank you. We'll get more into it and see some imagery later. Okay, one more question, then we'll see some more dance. Tell me about the title, Maslow's Peak. I did a little bit of Googling and understand that it doesn't come from the book, but rather from a psychologist, Maslow. Can you talk about how that plays into the work creatively?
Well, Abraham Maslow has the theory of the hierarchy of needs. And I called it Maslow's Peak because at what point do the characters in the book reach self-fulfillment? Or do they even reach that point? And when you go through these psychological needs of what exactly is important in order to survive at your fullest, tapping into those themes and figuring that out was my main goal within the work. It's a play between looking at the central characters of the story and the life lessons that come out of the story.
Thank you. I think we're going to see another excerpt now. Can you tell us what we're going to be looking at?
We're going to be looking at the characters, well, the central characters, Ralph and Jack. And the first solo that you're going to see is by Jerard, who's playing Jack. I thought it was important to bring two soloists. You're going to see them go through a process of them shedding skin and trying to figure out where this evil and moral complexity is coming to when they start to move. It's like there's a moment where they start to feel the division within themselves, and the beast within of them comes out through their body. So I'd like to introduce Jerard first, please. So Eli and Jerard, Eli, come out for us, please. So right now I've got two dancers working on the character of Jack. And what I was noticing in rehearsals last week is that when you have your hands, you run out and you start to look at your body beginning to change. So there has to be time. You can't just run out and all of a sudden hit that, right? So they have to see that transformation. You stand, your hands, and you want to almost look as though you don't recognize your hands. And even when you start to go into the extension of the leg and that promenade, you also want to start looking as though you first noticed it in the tips of your fingernails, and it continues into your forearms, into your arms. And the other thing I just noticed just now, when you're in the grand plie and you start to wipe your back, what are you wiping off, and how does that affect your spine and the core? So I think there can be more movement, there can be much more response in your spine. And does it make you thirsty? What's happening in the inside of your mouth? Yeah?
Were you asking?
No. Okay, show me the movement right before the response of the isolation chest into the pelvis from both of you. So, head, torso, through. Okay, do it again as though you're swallowing something, and then when you shoot out to more of an attack through the end and the arm, like a snake grab, and so it has to happen in the hand, but it also has to happen in the foot. There has to be an evolution from that feeling of venom coming into your veins out through the extension, so it just gets bigger. So don't make sure that you're not thinking technically in the sense of just acquiring the turn. Just don't go into these extensions and not staying in the acting and not being alive in the acting. Okay? All right, so let's see Eli do this for us, please. Thank you, Eli. So the next solo we're going to work on is, thank you. The next solo we're going to work on is Jerard. So Jerard, come out for us, please. And Jerard is playing the Ralph. And the solo you're about to see is his embodying that exploration of feeling the division in the community. It's it's close to the end of the first act, where you really start to see him be worn out and emotionally torn down from the chaos that is getting exposed throughout the narrative. Thank you, Gerard.
Wonderful, thank you. As I hope you are feeling as much as I'm feeling, this piece definitely builds another world and takes us there. So I want to talk with all of you about world building. Starting with you, Jennifer, I want to talk about the sonic musical world. I feel that creating musical worlds is really a trademark of your work and all the work that I have seen, and I don't know that the public knows, but you do a lot of that editing and building and piecing together of music yourself. I'd love this, even in those excerpts we've just heard, they're all in different places, haunting vocals, that real classical strings. I saw another clip where there's like a ticking, like a haunting ticking that doesn't really leave us. Tell us about where your process of discovery. Where do you find all of these tracks, and what makes you understand that they go together?
I feel the best answer is I have been working on this score for about 8 months, and I live in this story basically all day. And I'm originally from Toronto, Canada, so I take these long drives back and forth to go see my family, and I will go through many tracks. So it could be through basic social internet, going through YouTube, or basically anything that comes up. If it says, look at all of these, I will look through all of them. So we have about 85 different tracks on a playlist, and then I come in when I start workshopping material, I start pulling material or music that will really have me truthfully respond physically. And if I'm not connected to the music, the choreography will not look good, and I've known that for years, even when I'm teaching. So you just have to really figure out where these emotional arcs land when you're creating the score. The sounds that you're hearing are sounds of the jungle, sounds of the wolf. What is it to be, like when you're hiking or you're walking through a forest, you have to find these different sounds. So you'll be taking original sounds and laying it over the music. And I just spend time editing all of this and putting it in the right places for it to work.
And when you say original sounds, are you actually, have you actually recorded any of these sounds yourself? No, you're finding them.
I am that person
sounds.
that will go outside and record and record the sound of nature. I will do that. And then just keep over and laying it over and over.
Cool. So if I see
but
a wolf,
I couldn't find a wolf sound. No, so the wolf sound is purchased. Yes.
That's so amazing. Okay, we are lucky enough to have some imagery to look at as well, so I'm going to see if this works. So I turn to you, Guy. This is an old image, not what you will see if you come to the show in May, but I found it so interesting to see this original rendering and then where you've ended up most recently. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about where you started and then perhaps take us on the journey of what informed the changes that we'll show with where you ended up.
Okay, so as I jumped the gun on it earlier, Jennifer will come to me with an image, as I say, drop a pebble in a pond, and she's mentioned the structure at the World Trade Center. I'm sure you're all familiar with it, the one that looks like bones, and then I respond to that, and then do renderings of things that are in the area, and that came up. I do use various platforms to do that. I'll use Photoshop, design platforms, artificial intelligence, see how it responds to ideate, and then it starts throwing up a variety of things, and that was one of the first bunch of things that came up. Now, to build that and tour it is problematic.
Presenter in me thanks you.
Yeah. Also, where we're opening is the Mann Center, which is massive. It's a hangar-like space. And to go from that to somewhere else is something that one has to consider in the design process. It looks great, but not too practical. And then one considers budget constraints, which are really healthy. And it moved through structures like this to where are we going to show where we ended up? That was a whalebone, and as I mentioned, you start looking at design as texture, as atmosphere. So there was a whole debate going on about, is it a bone texture, is it driftwood, to help support the story. And then we ended up there. Part of the debate that we had in designing was, where are we going to project? If we have a whalebone, how do we project imagery on? Because Jennifer creates documentary ballet, as I said, puts in some social realism or social ideas, and eventually it's just project on the back, make a big projection of it. And the other point about Jennifer's choreography, it's very athletic. People climb, jump things. So what is not included here is that we did approach a really well-known sculptor to try and build something like what we had in the beginning, and it would have been a 20-foot structure, which would have been too heavy and too cumbersome, and that shrunk down to a rock, and an airplane wing, and trusses, which you find in any theater. But the idea is to give these texture and make it rusted, look as though it's abandoned. Then the ropes were thrown up by some process of ideating, and then Jennifer went, okay, aerial work. So that's what I mean when I say design or scenic design becomes part of the dramaturgical arc. You're working with bodies on stage. And I can't remember where the eye came from, but Jennifer's written a whole bunch of things about the eye being surveillance, inside consciousness. You can elucidate on that. So that's where we ended up. And that's the arc. It provides wonderful acrobatic possibilities to the dancers. They jump up and slide down that wing, climb up the trusses, up and down the rock. Yeah.
You want to add anything, Jennifer? About the vines or the eye?
Well, what was consistent about all of the drafts was that I wanted a jungle gym effect for the dancers to be able to have a lot of different ways of moving through the space. And the concept of the eyeball was important to me, because I always felt like, what if there was an eye that was watching all of them on stage, and there's always something on the outside or that are making them act a certain way. If you had surveillance, or if you had someone, I made a note for them the other day and said, when an adult comes into the room, what happens and what is your reaction? So, yeah, I mean, sometimes when you have that eye of surveillance over the stage, you can respond to it in different ways, whether you realize someone's watching and then you decide to behave appropriately, or you could also potentially feel like your morals or your ethics are being watched. And it's fitting for the idea of the hierarchy of needs.
Makes me think of I don't think of Lord of the Flies as a post-apocalyptic. It's not a post-apocalyptic novel, but this eye imagery is drawing a line for me to Margaret Atwood world and things of that place. Yeah, it's all relevant. Thank you. Emily, if I may turn to you. We don't see this today, but these are the costumes from the preview a year ago.
They are, yes. That's Act 1 now, yeah.
And from what I can see, what I found interesting from the video I got to preview is that every dancer in this work starts out looking exactly the same. But I understand from our conversation that as the work descends into Act 2, that becomes not the case. So can you talk a little bit about how your costume design and the clothing supports the character work?
Sure. Obviously, because it's dance, there's not an expository monologue at the top of the piece that explains, we're coming from a world of order, and we've crash landed into chaos, and now we have to make sense of it as a group. So when Jennifer and I first started these conversations, we sort of diverged from this is a private school into potentially this is a military academy or a military school, which the jackets are basically a riff off of an like West Point jacket. They're like a wool that you would see in that style of uniform. And then the bottoms of them, you can kind of see echoes of the original iteration of the set, which was the arches in the bottom, which was kind of a play on a kilt. So we were sort of taking military or school tradition from all over the place. But I think what's really key about this is that it applies a veneer of order to everyone on stage from the beginning. And for me, dramaturgically, if you think about them coming from a military school, they would be extremely accustomed to hierarchy and order. They would know exactly who they're supposed to look to in what set of circumstances to get in order and then carry it out. And people who undergo that system of training are broken down and then sort of built back up into a group that does engage in a lot of groupthink. So if you think about these kids going into a school where their meal times are very regimented, what they get to eat is very regimented, who they get to sit with is very regimented, and how that would create sort of a false sense that they understand the order of the world very clearly. So then when this traumatic event takes place, it all kind of gets thrown into chaos. And then as you move forward into Act 2, you see this real grasping of the individual and how the environment starts to interact with them as individuals or influence them as individuals. So we sort of get into these two groups that are competing with each other, the shirts and the kilts, basically. And they sort of start to magpie things from their environment. And when I was talking to the dancers the other day during fittings, I posed some questions like, what if in your group, one of the things that you do to prove your bravery is that you have to sneak away from your encampment at night to go back to the crash site, not knowing what the environment has in it, not knowing what animals are there, and you have to take something. And then that becomes a talisman that you get to wear on you, like a military patch, sort of, that you committed this act of daring or bravery. Or what happens if you uphold the leader's structure very effectively, and they gift you something that you put on your clothing. So all of that individual sort of ideation actually has to do with participating in further groupthink, if that makes sense, and sort of creating yourself a place to exist and grounding yourself very clearly despite the chaos that's happening around you.
Thank you. One more question, then we'll see some more dancing. For you, Jennifer, I think, again, for me, another hallmark of your work is partnering and the intricacy of it, the lifting, yes, but also like scooping and tossing and like in and out of the floor and how they help each other down and up. Mm-hmm. And it just occurs to me so viscerally that this story is so much about human-to-human contact and physical touch. And I just wonder if you can talk about how the themes affected your choreographic process, or maybe not, in the way you were building the partnering specifically.
Well, there's a lot of conversation about who's Team Ralph and who is Team Jack. And then the dancers started to get really detailed about, well, I'm not supposed to touch that person. Should I touch this person? And then it was sort of creating its own choreographic structure, which was a challenge and which was great, and then also took me into different ways of, okay, well, you're gonna have to dive under and then jump into this person's arms. So that expanded partnering in itself. The partnering with the apparatus on stage was also another challenge, because now we're figuring out if Jack is going to fall from a rock, who's catching him and why are they catching him, and when that body lands into your hands, what is the truthful response when you see someone in power, you don't like that person in power is now touching you. So it's constantly the characters, it's the characters that definitely sculpted the why behind all of the partnering. Which brings, it's a whole different level than me just creating a ballet work and just making interesting partnering on a point show. Yeah.
And what are we going to see now?
we are going to see I believe it's a last group. It's group work, but it's also, we're gonna have Savannah come out. Let's have Savannah come out first, please. I think we need the projector up, please. So within the work, we were talking about this beast within that now starts to, we saw the first solo with Jerard, but then there's the Jerard team. And the Jerard team, all these dancers start to create this movement. Can you just show the movement for us? Where it starts to come out of your mouth. And what if we created a solo about that action, and I think if your hairs were trying to, what if your hair, like your hair is coming up, what is it coming out of your mouth onto the brush of your hair, of your arms? And then as you're doing that, there's a sensation of it almost feeling sticky and uncomfortable, and you start building improvs and a physical reaction to all these different ways of describing the possibilities of something that's coming out of your skin that you almost become infatuated with. Now I'm going to ask you to do that again. And while you're doing it, there's a shock, and there's now facially, you're shocked about what's coming in. Because it seems very voluntary, but if you were all of a sudden looking at your hand, like really look at the substance. And come to a pause. Thank you. Let's have, we have our other next dancer here named Lanie, and she's going to do hummingbird improv. So at the beginning of the work, she's seen beginning to see confrontation amongst the dancers on stage, and she's almost playing the role of Piggy, the voice of reason. So she's very interested about what's happening amongst the dancers on stage, but also feeling the environment around her, and she becomes this busybody on stage where she's trying to get in tune with everybody in the space. So you have a hummingbird that is, what we've been practicing is this hummingbird is always chasing around you, and you're trying to figure out it's going into different spots. But I feel like as I've been watching this over the past couple of weeks, it just consistently moves. And when does the hummingbird stop? Because you know that sometimes the hummingbird just floats and stays in one place. So what does that look like in your stopping, and also your ability to read it with your eyes? And can you potentially give it a table for it to rest on? And if it goes a little bit higher, you begin to chase it, and you find it almost unreachable, and it takes you into jumps. And come to a pause. Good, good. So let's go into the whole group work with music, please. Dancers, stand by, and you'll see both the solos evolve within the evolution of that phrase work. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon. Thank you all for sharing about your creative process.
Thank you.
And just one final reminder, you can see Maslow's Peak at the Mann Center in Philadelphia, May 2nd and 3rd. Tickets at balletx.org. Thank you so much.